Welcome one, welcome all to TCA's Halloween update. We're here just shy of Halloween itself, making the update actually come out on time, which quite honestly, with the way things were looking behind the scenes, I wasn't totally sure if it was gonna happen. But we made it. Now, there is another game that hasn't come out with their Halloween update yet, that I'm pretty sure is getting one. It's getting pretty close to the 31st, guys. Oh, they'll make it. I believe in them. They can do it. Anyways, we're not here to talk about that game. We're here to talk about this game. So, what was the most notable things with the Halloween update? Obviously, the Halloween event itself, the new boss, as well as White Album, the new stand that was brought with the update. Starting in that order, let's start with the Halloween event. The Halloween event really isn't anything mind-blowing. You've probably seen it before, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. Basically, at the bottom right of your screen is a little pumpkin counter. This pumpkin counter can go up in a variety of different ways. You can pick them up in main game, you get certain amounts by beating the world bosses, you get them from winning game modes, that kind of thing. Basically, just about anything you can do in the game is going to increase your pumpkin count. Now, what can you do with those pumpkins? Yeah, it's skins. We all knew it would be skins. Now, admittedly, I'm a pretty big fan of a fair few of these skins, so I'm not going to complain too much on the fact that it's just skins. Especially considering the fact that White Album came with the update, which is a totally new stand. I've never been hugely invested in these skin updates. There are some things on here that I do want to get, most notably the Devil's Hell skin for the World Over Heaven, which I think is really cool, and the Slender Man skin for Whitesnake, which I also think is quite badass. The rest of them, not really my cup of tea, but I'm sure they are for others. Now, at the time of recording this, which is Saturday on the weekend, literally the day that the update came out, I think the acquisition of pumpkins is quite slow, and a lot of people have picked up on that and are not super happy about it. But honestly, I think it depends on how long the event runs for, rather than the speed that you get them at. If the event is only going to run till a little bit after Halloween, then yeah, it's probably too slow. But if it runs till, I don't know, mid-November, I think it's perfectly reasonable. I don't think people should expect to be able to go through and unlock every single skin from an event. That just seems kind of backwards. If you do want to get every single skin for an event, I think you should either have to grind a ridiculous amount or pay money. Because at the end of the day, this is a free-to-play game, and, you know, the money has to come from somewhere in order to continue development, and microtransactions and skins just tend to be that. And so if people want to spend their money to get all the skins, so be it. If people want to spend all of their time trying to get the skins, so be it. But if you're not going to put in the time or put in the money, then, well, it should be reasonable for you to get maybe one or two of these, but definitely not all of them. Now, whether or not the acquisition of these is going to be subject to change, and if we see any changes, well, that I have absolutely no idea. But at least in my opinion, right now, I think that the gather rates is a little bit low, but all in all, it's in a somewhat good spot. Now, also directly related to the Halloween update is the new boss that they've added. The new boss spawn item you can get out of chests. I'm pretty sure it has the same spawn rate as all the other boss items. And if you spawn in the boss and manage to defeat it strictly by yourself, you get 100 pumpkins, which, if you've been playing, is a lot. Now, beating this by yourself can be easier said than done. The boss has several cheese mechanics that, if you don't know about them ahead of time and you're trying to do this by yourself, are probably just going to obliterate you. But if you know about all the jank and cheese it has, you can get this down to a science and not have a very difficult time taking him out. So, what is the cheese in question? Well, number one, Peter hates me and made the boss heavy weather. Peter, why, dude? What's wrong with you? But just making it heavy weather wasn't enough. He also made it so that way the tornado move that heavy weather has goes at like Mach 6, is uncancelable, and doesn't ragdoll you, unlike the normal heavy weathers one. Basically meaning that if you don't predict the move, it's gonna hit you. And then if it hits you, well, here comes the AI to beat the crap out of you. That's not all when it comes to cheese that the AI's got though. You know Heavy Weather's electric field type move where it does a big AoE stun? Yeah, well, that's an evasive now. In other words, they can use it while it's in stun. The first hit will ragdoll you and knock you back. So in other words, the boss is effectively immune to combos. This move seemingly has no cooldown. I don't know what determines when the AI uses it and when it doesn't, but it seems like they can just throw it out whenever they want. They just don't care. Sometimes you'll try to combo and it'll be like, nope, multi-hit, no, I don't think so. See ya, you're done. Now really, those are the two things that you need to be keeping track of, because the rest of the moveset that the boss has is really not that oppressive. Other than those two moves, you can cancel anything else that the boss is trying to throw out at you. But even despite that, there is one last thing that this boss does that was clearly just intended to fuck with people. And that's that unlike every single other raid boss in the game, this boss will just straight up barrage you. That may not sound that bad on paper until you realize that the boss has like destructive power 7 or something crazy like that, which means that on top of having 1000 health, they also do way more damage than any of the stands you can have. So if you get barraged, even if you barrage back, you're taking a ton of damage. And then if you try to combo them off the barrage, they use the combo escape and you go flying away. So you're probably hearing all of this and you're like, well, how do I beat the boss then? And quite honestly, it's not that hard. You mostly just have to cheese. Number one, pay attention to when they're using the tornado move. Once you block it once, it does take a little while for them to use it again. So just keep back, eventually they'll use it, and once they do, you can start going in. Now at this point, you basically just want to space your M1 attacks, because if you space them correctly, they can usually beat out the AIs, since the AI just isn't very smart when it comes to using its attacks. And as long as you're keeping a perfect space between them and you, they aren't going to be able to hit you with their combo escape. Most of the time, they won't even trigger it. But if you get too close or you go in for a combo, you can expect to either be barraged and lose a ton of health, get combo breakered and then lose a ton of health, just get M1'd and lose a ton of health. You basically just don't want to take a ton of damage. And naturally, any moves that are grabs or can do big damage, ragdolls, beatdowns, stuff like that are really good here. Personally, I think stands like the World and Star Platinum are probably the best for this, mostly coming from the fact that they have cutscene moves that last a while and ragdoll people really far back, and their other tools are pretty good at dealing with the boss as well as having high destructive power. Hopefully that'll help a few of you with the boss if you're hoping to do it solo. Now naturally, if you're trying to do it with more than one person, you're not going to lose, but it's probably going to take a while because people are constantly going to be getting ragdolled by the combo escape. It is what it is. Last thing on straight content that was added to the update, and we've got White Album. White Album gives me PTSD from that other game that we were talking about earlier, as well as the fact that I just don't think this stand is all that interesting and doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. That being said, White Album seemed to be in a pretty good state when we were testing it in the test server, so hopefully it's not completely colossally broken or totally useless now that it's in the hands of the people. I don't think it will be, and even if it is, I don't think we'll see too much of it, considering the fact that YBA's White Album was broken and nobody bothered to use it anyway. Anyways, when it comes to moves, White Album has a fair few of them, all of them with their uses. You've got Flash Freeze, which is an uncancelable combo starter, which is basically one of those moves that you just use during an M1 trade, and if the person doesn't see it coming, well, here comes the combo. Ice Trap, which is a pretty unique move that pops spikes out of the ground directly where your cursor is pointed. Ground Freeze, which is a big AoE freeze move that acts just like Vampire's Freeze. Freeze Burst, which is basically just an unmissable big damage cone in front of you. Ice Skating, which does exactly what you would expect it to, with the caveat of the fact that it leaves ice behind you that if people step on, they'll take damage. And finally, the big ultimate move for White Album, which is Gently Weeps. Gently Weeps, when activated, counters all projectiles, no surprise there, as well as an upgrade that you can get later down the line that'll make it so your M1s deal frostbite damage. Now that's the big gimmick for White Album, frostbite. Basically, every single attack that White Album has builds up Frostbite on the character. And when you hit a certain threshold of Frostbite, it will proc the effect. When the effect is procced, it'll be very clear because the enemy will be outlined in ice. Now, once the effect is activated, it'll do a set amount of damage based on the upgrades that you have unlocked, as well as slowing the opponent down for, I believe, 10 seconds. Now, of course, this is an interesting effect when you consider the fact that you can pop Gently Weeps, and then every single one of your M1 exchanges is going to be slowly proccing Frostbite, and when you do, it gives you an advantage as well as some extra damage. Overall, White Album has quite a few just super lame true combos that I'm sure people will find before I even tell you guys about them. But I think all in all, while it doesn't interest me in particular, some people will get some use out of this for sure. And naturally, any new thing being added to the game is always good, especially on the front of stands. Now, we talked about the actual content that's in the game. Now we're gonna touch on some smaller stuff that was in the patch notes that I think is important to know if you plan on continuing to play. The first is that M1s were adjusted pretty much across the board. Because of some nonsense you could do with the World Over Heaven where you'd ragdoll with the 5th M1 and time stop, as well as being able to heavy punch people into time stop and do all that kind of nonsense, the M1 ragdoll speed on the 5th M1 was reduced, so hopefully that stuff won't be happening, as well as making it so if you do land the 5th M1, it doesn't put you on M1 cooldown for like 30 years, because that just doesn't make very much sense. You also move a little bit faster while you're doing your M1s, which should make them feel a bit better overall, and the speeds on some of the slower M1 speed stands in the game, like Sea Moon, White Snake, The Hand, Crazy Diamond, Killer Queen, those kinds of stands, which just felt kind of bad, have been brought up a little bit to be more in line with some of the other ones, so hopefully they feel less bad. Projectiles, Peter and I in particular did about like 8,000 years of testing on this, and unfortunately could not get to the bottom of why sometimes they just go backwards or don't work. The best we managed to get it was spawning the projectile directly out of the root part of your character, which seems to work a lot better than the projectile system that was in before, but you guys will have to let me know how that stuff is working out, as well as me obviously testing it myself. When it comes to stands in particular, Gold Experience ate a few nerfs that it definitely deserves, as well as some stuff that I'm glad is back, but I don't really know why they did it. For example, tree creation, the move that puts a big tree under you, is now cancelable, which I think makes sense considering it's a basically unmissable massive hitbox move that also block breaks you. But on the flip side, the tree is now collidable, which means you can stand on it again, and I always really liked that, maybe just because I'm a super lame player, but I think it's fun that you can stand on top of the tree. I was sad when they took it out, and I'm glad it's back, even if it's gonna make some people upset. For the record, I didn't ask for this. I mean, I did in previous videos, but not when it came to this. Peter just did it, so shoutouts to him. Thanks, Peter. Frog Chop also became cancelable, once again because Gold Experience just had like 100 uncancelable moves and was really lame to fight against. And Soul Punch had its windup increased a little bit, so now it's the same as a Heavy Punch. For some reason it was faster before, quite difficult to react to. Now it should be a little bit better. Star Platinum's had a lot of complaints community-wise when it comes to the balance patches we did to it last update. People say it's overpowered, yada yada yada. I disagree, and so does the design team, which is why the only nerf that it got in this update was an increased cooldown to aura kicks. Star Platinum is a fun stand to play, and it's in a good spot in my opinion, as well as everyone else on the design team. We'd rather take stands and move them up in line with Star Platinum, as we feel like that's a pretty good spot for stands to be in, instead of trying to take everything down onto the level of things that aren't quite as much fun. Now that being said, the balance on Star Platinum to begin with didn't feel like it was in that bad of a spot, at least in my opinion. Made in Heaven had a bunch of changes done when it comes to time acceleration. Made in Heaven's time acceleration before the update was a complete disaster. It did all kind of jank things, and it probably will still do all kinds of jank things that we're gonna need to sort out, but hopefully it will be in a better spot now. Basically, it didn't have any sort of cooldown when you used ragdoll moves, so you could just confirm it off of any of your ragdolls that you had, as well as the fact that if you were using Made in Heaven and someone else used time acceleration, it put your time acceleration on cooldown for like a long time, as well as making the universe reset cooldown go up to like 400 seconds, even if nobody used universe reset. It was a mess. And so hopefully a lot of that will be getting sorted out. So in matches where there's multiple Made in Heavens, it will be more of an even playing field for whoever doesn't get their time acceleration off the first time. Now in terms of Universe Reset, we've made some changes because the healing from Universe Reset really didn't feel like it added too much to the game. It felt a lot of the time that you were just stalling the match and all it did was delay the inevitable when you used healing or get a ridiculous amount of health back after you took a stock in 1v1s, which was super lame. So rather than trying to mess with the healing or balance it out, it's just been completely axed. Now when you use Universe Reset, it just directly helps the Made in Heaven player, which makes more sense when it comes to the move. You get the damage increase, they get the damage reduction, no harm, no foul. Now time acceleration itself had a little bit of a nerf, making it so that way your cooldowns aren't reduced by nearly as much, as well as the standoff hasty chop having a reduced end lag, so now it's not just a death sentence if you miss. And finally, your skill tree costs have been increased a little bit because, well, Made in Heaven was very cheap. And admittedly, it's still pretty cheap considering it's a Heaven stand. A lot of White Snake's hitboxes were made better, so that way they're less, well, jank. But the real thing to note here is the disc insert linger frames were brought down by half. Yes, we all know how infamous disc insert's linger is, now it should be a lot better. Now, the last two things on here that I think are really noteworthy are the hand as well as Seamoon. The hand prior to this update was the worst stand in the game. It took that spot directly from Killer Queen and said, "Gimme that, you can't have it back." The hand was just bad. It had two moves that dealt damage, Erasure and Kick Barrage, which basically meant that you were constantly trying to M1 people, but your M1s sucked, were slow, and weak. The hand was just bad. That's all we can say about it. It sucked. So it's gotten a lot of buffs that hopefully will make it more fun to play. Number one is the Erasure cooldown, which had its cooldown time chopped by 10 seconds. It went from 25 seconds to 15 seconds. This is supposed to be the hand's main thing and way of getting damage, and considering how easy it is to cancel and how difficult it can be to land against good players, having a punishingly long 25-second cooldown when you barely have any moves to begin with was rough. So we've fixed that quite a bit. On that same front, if you've ever played the hand before, you might have noticed that when you use any sort of Erasure-typed move, your walk speed gets just reduced to a crawl. Thankfully, it doesn't do that anymore. So if you're trying to hit someone and they're just a little bit outside of your range when you start the attack, you'll be able to move forward and hit them with it rather than it just not going anywhere. Ground Erasure basically got completely reworked. It's now an uncancelable ragdoll that actually deals damage. So in other words, almost like a singular hit Kick Barrage in a sense. This will give the hand another option when it comes to getting damage that should hopefully help it not feel completely horrible. And finally, the Kick Barrage got a little bit of a damage increase, so it feels less like hitting someone with a wet noodle. We're hoping with all of these buffs, the hand will be in a much better spot. General consensus was it probably needs a rework, but we can take what we have, work with it, and hopefully make it fun to play until whenever that ends up happening. And finally, the last thing of note that I think is on here is the Seamoon inversion passive change. This one barely made it in right at the end, or at least what felt like right at the end of the update, because I was fighting against Fel, who was using Seamoon, and wanted to shoot myself. So, had this changed, so hopefully that's less of a problem. Your inversion passive no longer cancels moves and no longer stuns. The inversion passive is really cool. I like it a lot, but unfortunately, when it came to gameplay, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Basically, you would fight someone, and if you traded an M1 with them and yourself, and you won out the trade with another move and then tried to combo off of it with something cancelable, the game would just be like, nah, you're done. It gets canceled by the inversion passive, and now you're getting comboed for an interaction that you should have won. That's stupid. I don't know what I was thinking when I used to think this was okay, but I was wrong. I'll admit, dead wrong. It's been changed. Hopefully that will prevent some frustration in the future. Now, other than that, there isn't much else in the update that I think is really important. There was some lag compensation stuff that was added that'll make it so that way objects far in the distance won't render in unless you start getting closer to them. I think this will help some lower end machines, but I do think it's a shame that there's no toggle or anything for this, as I have a beefy machine, so I don't really need to worry about lag most of the time. And things can look real bad when you're walking down a street and you just watch things pop in, or you watch half of a building disappear. It just looks wrong. And it reminds me a lot of some of the complaints I had back with Subnautica, where you would see things just pop into existence. Same thing here, but on steroids. And the last thing to note on here is the corrupted arrow code, which you don't have a lot of time to make use of. And that's a really good item. So if you're looking to do that, recommend getting on that sooner rather than later. For those who might not know, a corrupted arrow is an arrow that you can use on a stand, any stand in the game, and it will give you a skin for that stand. So for example, if you have the World Over Heaven and you use a corrupted arrow, it'll give you a skin for that without having to do the ridiculous grind for the World Over Heaven skin. In order to get the corrupted arrow code, you need to get to rank 20 before you can redeem it. The code is corrupted_8K in all caps, and the code itself expires on the 4th of November. So you gotta get to rank 20 if you're not already. Now, one of the things that I'm not entirely sure that the developers considered was the fact that ranks reset every month. So come November 1st, I think everyone's rank is gonna reset. I don't know if they thought that through. For the record, I didn't know about the code until the update just came out. So if that's the case, and you're not already close by the time you're seeing this video, which will be coming out on the 30th, meaning that you have 2 days before the stuff resets, I wouldn't bother and just wait until the first and try to get up to rank 20 in those 3 days. It's not really that hard if you're already at rank 10, but it will definitely be a bit of a struggle if you're trying to do it all on the last night. Anyways, that's all. Update overall, pretty good. Looking forward to the future stuff when it comes to the game, as well as extremely curious if that other game is going to update in time for Halloween. We'll see. If you want me to cover that, of course, let me know in the comments. I'm sure you will. And if it's anything worthwhile, I will. Anyways, with all that being said, I'm done here. If you enjoyed the video and found it informative, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.